Hello everyone. Today we can spend 5 minutes for discussing a new concept, theory of constraints. What do you mean by a constraint? It is something that limits or controls what you can do. It is a real world limit on the possibilities. And it is important that you have to identify and rectify a constraint. For that, you need to understand what a constraint is. It is anything that stops you from achieving your goal. That is constraint. It can be internal and external. That is, if the market demands more than you can deliver, it is termed as internal constraint. On the other hand, if you produce more than the market will bear, it is termed as external constraint. Similarly, if the equipment used in the organization limits your ability to produce more, it could be termed as internal constraint. Sometimes people could be an internal constraint because of lack of skills, personal and behavioral issues, etc. And sometimes policy can act as an internal constraint because it can prevent you from making more product or expanding services. Okay. So remember, a constraint is always a limiting factor. Constraints may be of many types. Common business constraints are time constraint, maybe financial concerns, management and regulations. All this could be act as constraint. Constraints means it is a limitation imposed on you by someone else, right? So if a project, we can say it is time restraint, which means that it is the inability to reach a goal because of your own shortage of time. You know, all business have a common goal, that is to make profit, and this goal is constrained by 3 variables. First one, throughput. Second one, operational expense, and third one, inventory. What is throughput? It is the rate at which the business generates revenue through the sale of goods. And what is operational expense? It is the expense incurred to turn the inventory into throughput. Okay. Then third one, inventory. That means the cost of the products that are to be sold from raw material through to finished goods. To turn an investment into profit, an entrepreneur must build a plant. That is his operational expense, okay? And he has to buy the raw material, that is inventory, and find a willing buyer for the products, that is throughput, okay? And one of the 3 constraints will be the limiting factor at any time. The essence of TOC says the best for an organization to achieve its goal is to reduce operating expenses, reduce inventory, and increase throughput. There are different types of constraints, that is behavioral constraint is there, managerial constraint is there, capacity constraint, market constraint, logistical constraint. What could be behavioral constraint? It prefers workers' attitude, their mental state, etc. If it is not good, it will not be effective for a smooth organizational performance, right? What could be a managerial constraint? It is, of course, the management policies. And what is capacity constraints? That is when demand is more than actual capacity, we can say it is a capacity constraint. And next, what is market constraint? That is when demand is less than actual capacity. Okay. Then lastly, logistical constraint. That is problems due to planning and control of system. This theory of constraint, introduced by Dr. Eliyahu Goldratt, says that a small number of constraints prevents any management system from achieving more of its goals. There could be always at least one constraint, and this theory of constraints uses a focusing process in order to identify that constraint and then restructures to address it. This is actually process improvement methodology, and which give importance to identifying the system constraint or bottleneck. What do you mean by bottleneck? The same. It means constraint. That is, in manufacturing activity, the constraint is often referred to as a bottleneck. Okay. So the theory of constraints defines a set of tools that can use to manage constraints, thereby increasing profits. So we can say the theory of constraint is an organizational change method that is focused on profit improvement. Why profit improvement? That is, improving profitability requires the removal or reduction of business constraints, right? And I already told you a constraint is any factor that limits the organizations from getting more of whatever it strives for. which is usually profit. That's why we can say it's focused on profit improvement. Okay. How are you going to implement use in an organization? There are 5 steps. First step is to identify the constraint. Second step is to exploit the bottleneck. Bottleneck means same constraint, okay. Third step is to subordinate everything else to the constraint. Fourthly, elevate the constraint. And lastly, go back to step 1 but beware of inertia. These are the 5 focusing steps. Let me explain briefly. The first step is to identify the constraint, that is the problem. It is also called as bottleneck. Okay, so it is the area the work is most limited or hindering the optimized operations. Okay, so identifying the constraint, it is the most difficult task and it can take some time also. In some cases it may not be very clear, so a hurried inquiry may lead to a wrong conclusion. The second step is to exploit the bottleneck. This means making sure the bottleneck is being put to its most profitable use. Suppose if the constraint is a slow machine that produce 2 types of products, okay, a very profitable product and a less profitable product, and then you should make sure the machine is always working on the more profitable product. That should be taken care in this step. You can exploit the constraint only if you are aware of the problem. That is only if you are identified the same. Okay, we can take an example of manufacturing of car. There is a production, the production of engine, production of its body, and the production of tires and assembly of car, and storage is also there. So what is the constraint you have to identify first? Then try to exploit it. Okay. If you check in departments or sections at every morning, that is before the work is starting, there may be chances that the staff in these sections are mainly idle. Therefore, the machines also. And if the machine gets switched on, the parts are available from the other processes. So we need to identify here is the problem, that is waste of time. If you fix that is the cause of the problem, that is extra time is getting wasted. Okay, then what you do? The solution is to cut off the extra time. Once you fixed the constraint or problem, you have to take a solution which will increase the efficiency of the constraint. So exploiting stage, that is in this stage it focuses on maximizing the constraint. When you do this, overall productivity is improved. Clear? Third step is to subordinate all other factors in the operation to the bottleneck. This means optimizing the production process to the pace of the bottleneck. Suppose if the production process involves 3 machines, one can produce 10 products per hour, and second machine can produce 20 products per hour, and the third can only produce 3 products per hour. And then you must operate the first 2 machines so they produce only 3 products per hour to keep pace with the bottleneck machine. So this activity reduces the excess inventory. Okay. You should note one point that here I mentioned 3 machines, right, in the above example. These 3 machines are operating in 3 different processes or 3 different stages. Okay. Here our constraint is the machine which is operating in 3rd stage. Okay. So in this stage we are giving more importance to constraint, that so that the organization production process is running according to the capacity of the constraint. Clear? That is, you have to adjust the production capacity of the machines in first stage as well as second stage according to the pace of bottleneck machine. In short, organization should adjust the rest of the system to enable the constraint to operate at maximum effectiveness. I hope you getting what I am trying to convey. I can give you another example for this stage. Okay. Suppose your constraint is the capacity of the supplier. Especially when you are relying on one supplier, it will become a difficulty. So in this step, what you have to do is your entire production schedule should be aligned with the capacity of the supplier. Okay. Next step is to increase the capacity of the constraint or bottleneck. For example, in the previous example, we mentioned a poor machine which has low production capacity. Alright. So the bottleneck was that the machine can produce only 3 products per hour. Then you should try to increase that output rate. different options that you can use, that is perhaps by outsourcing that pace of production, or you can purchase two or more those machines to increase output. So basically you have identified that constraint, right? And this is the step where you mitigate or eliminate it. So at the end of the day, what matters is that you have made tremendous savings. In this stage also we can take the supplier example. Here, when the supplier's capacity was continuing as a constraint, you can try to eliminate it by identifying alternate sources of suppliers or reduce the reliance on one supplier. That's what happening here. Here you are reducing the backlog for the constraint. Backlog means that is the accumulation of uncompleted work. So you prevented the potential inventory loss. Okay. So actually here we are trying to improve the internal efficiency by dealing with the real problem. And the last step is repeat the above process with a new constraint. That is, when you successfully manage one constraint or one factor, another bottleneck will arise as a constraint. So you need to check the system again for another constraint. Okay. That is, you should follow the above steps in dealing with that new constraint. That is, you have to repeat this process again. That is, this implementing TOC, it's a never-ending process. Within the time constraint, I mean the video time, okay. I tried to include some examples. Hope you got some clarity about this concept. Okay, thank you for watching.